Sono Jorge Ramos, sono Lead Analytics da Zalando. Siamo 25 analisti, si dice in italiano? Non lo so. Analisti da Product Analytics, quello che facciamo. Sono venuto oggi da Berlino per parlare un po' di metodologia. Spero che sia interessante con voi. Okay, I will switch to English now. Couple of things. I'm going to be talking about psychology a bit. Is there any psychologist in the room or somebody who studied psychology? Okay, good. If I said something stupid, let me know, because I'm not a psychologist. So expect oversimplifications. The second thing, I would like to make it a bit interactive. It's not like a game, but if you have questions, you stop me, you interrupt me. I will also ask you questions, and I hope there's a bit of participation. I hope so. That's it. Let's go for it. How to avoid jumping to the wrong conclusions when analyzing data. Sounds super exciting. Not. All right, so data is the new oil. How many times have you heard this thing? A million? A billion? A zillion? I'm bored of hearing this, honestly. I'm not even sure it's true, but I mean, there's some meaning, there's some reason behind it. And it's true that data can power our businesses like oil does with our cars or with our vehicles. But it's also something very important about data, like with oil. Just by having the oil doesn't mean that you get anywhere. You need to use it, and you need to use it in the right way. So what we're going to be talking about today is how to use your data, but from, let's say, a perspective of the web analytics cycle, the analytics cycle. Probably you're familiar with this. It's something similar to what Enrico was talking about before. So this lean analytics cycle sounds quite simple: define, measure, analyze, action. But actually, there are a few tasks. There's just a few of them that are part of each of those stages. Some of these can be automated today. When I started doing analytics like 10 years ago, most of these were manual. In the last few years, there's a lot of things that happen automatically, which is quite nice, honestly, saves a lot of time, a lot of effort. But there's still a few where we need our brains, our human minds, especially this too. When we interpret data and when we give recommendations about the data that we are analyzing or that we are reporting on, we still need to use our brains. And that's for us as analysts. But the person who's receiving our reports also needs to use their brains. Otherwise, they will make the wrong decisions based on this. And this is exactly what I want to talk about today. I know there's a lot of chat, a lot of talk out there about machine learning, data science, artificial intelligence, blah, blah, blah. All that is great. I mean, we do that as well. But I still believe there is not enough attention on the problems, on the problematic of human thinking when analyzing data. Okay, so this is about methodology, this is about psychology. More or less, this is what we will be talking about today. So there will be an introduction to the limitations of human thinking. That's why I was talking about psychology. I'll be talking about psychology a bit. Then cognitive biases, as, let's say, introduction, as context about what is coming afterwards. And then a methodology to try to overcome those things, those problems, those limitations. And the end, some conclusions so you don't forget anything. If you find it very boring right now, just let me know. I'll try to put some jokes inside or something. All right, so limitations of human thinking. Human thinking is basically influenced by two things: perception and memory. Right? So perception is how we relate to our reality, how we absorb what happens around us, how we collect information from our surroundings, right? More or less. Oversimplified, but more or less that's the thing. And memory, in the end, is how we store all that information that we collect and how we take it back at some point, how we retrieve it, how we recover it. Those two things, especially memory, is very important when we do analysis because memory creates like a continuous stream of information based on everything we know, everything we experienced, that will influence how we read our data and what interpretations we do on our data. And of course, perception is what goes into our memory. So actually understanding how these two things work will help us be better analysts, hopefully. All right, perception. So perception, as I said, is how we absorb the data, what happens around us. And there's like two main problems with perception. The first one is that we tend to perceive what we expect to perceive, right? What we want to perceive also plays a role, but what we expect to perceive is actually much more important. It's like you're always trying to confirm your expectations when you're looking at things, when you're like receiving new information. And the second problem is that our mindsets are very quick to form. So we very, very quickly create our own opinion about something, but then changing that opinion, even if we get more information and more accurate information, better data, that opinion is hard to change. Think of it. I mean, think of yourself, but also think of the people that you know. Not necessarily in a web analytics context, but in any context in life. That happens quite a lot. For that, I'm going to do a little game. So two examples. So we tend to perceive what we expect to perceive. I'm going to show you an image for 3 seconds, and then you will tell me you saw something weird, okay? So 1, 2, 3. Did you see something strange in that? What did you see? Somebody wants to say?
A triangle with phrases in it.
Okay. Did you see something weird in the phrases?
No.
No. Anybody did see something? Okay. Paris in the spring? That's all the time you had to read. Okay. Okay. Maybe 3 seconds was not enough. Let's do 3 more seconds. 1, 2, 3. Now you see something. Okay. Correct. I gave you a second chance, so the articles are repeated twice. If you're not expecting to see something weird, you won't see that. You say, like, Paris in the spring, once in a lifetime, bird in the hand. That's how our brains work. Okay? I know, it's a stupid example, but I think it works. Second example. So we tend to perceive what we expect to perceive. Again, I'm going to show you an image for 2 seconds. You know you're going to find something weird, so you'll be paying a lot of attention, and you say, I saw it. Okay, that's the plan. Let's see if you can make it. 1, 2. What did you see? Black hearts, I heard. And spades are red. Okay, that's true. If I hadn't told you, I mean, there's of course there are exceptions. There are people who observe better and they have better perception to things. But honestly, I've tried this with at least 25 people. Nobody was able to tell me what was weird in this if I was not telling them that there was something weird about it. Okay? Great. So also we mentioned that mindsets are quick to form. So you get a perception about something, you get an opinion about something, but they're very hard to change. And for that, I'm going to show you like a very, very, very old school example. So what do you see in here? The skull, cráneo, right? Okay. Now I'm going to be switching next slides, adding more definition. You'll see the number up there changing. As soon as you see something that is not that, raise your hand. Okay? So 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have somebody back there. What do you see? It's a lady on a mirror. And now we all know there's a lady on a mirror, but we still see the skull. At least I do. And I've seen this slide like 1 billion times. And I still see the human skull. So that's how perception works. Of course, this is an example. This is an oversimplification. When we work with data, it's not the same thing. But when we work with opinions and with ideas that we form in our brains, it's kind of a similar thing. Especially, I mean, something I must say. Once you are aware of this, you're less likely of falling into such problems. I think it's very important as well for the people that receive the information that we create. So those reports that we generate as analysts. All right, so that was about perception. About memory. Memory in general has like three main problems. First one is that our working memory is limited. I mean, we can only have like a number of things in our mind at the same time. Probably you heard this rule about the 7 plus minus 2 items. You heard that ever? No? Yeah? So that's this psychological theory. I think it dates back from the 60s or something, that with a lot of experimentation, they found that 7 is the magic number of items that we can keep in our mind, so to remember all the time. Some people can store more, like up to 9, some people less. We're talking about like working memory, so like the active memory, not long-term memory or stuff like that, but like what we are using like right now. That's, for instance, I had a professor about web analytics, and when he was talking about KPIs and dashboards, he said, never place more than 7 KPIs on a dashboard, because otherwise it just becomes a book that you need to read in chapters. Okay, 7 is a good number, because you can actually make some sense of all of it at the same time. Also, another thing is that we tend to store information on categories. So when you see something that you've never seen before, you put it in a category, in a mental category that you have. If you don't have such a category, you probably create one. But once you put something into a category, it's very hard to move it into a different one. This is hard to understand. Let's see if I can find a good example. But if you identify something as a threat, as a danger, as a risk, okay, this is a risk. It's very hard to think of it as an opportunity at a different time. This is a bit abstract, I know, but let's continue. And then, of course, there are factors that influence what we remember and how we remember it. So, for instance, if you were part of that event or of that discussion, it's much more likely that you will remember than if it's a discussion or an event that is being told to you. Like if somebody says, this thing happened, you probably will change it a bit when you memorize it, right? Also, if by the time that you experience that or that you discovered something, you think that is a very important thing, it's much more likely that you will remember it than if by that time you just find it like, yeah, interesting. And of course, it also happens, sorry, I forget the last one. I don't have notes, I'm sorry. I have just like very old school paper notes. Okay. Of course, recency. Did I talk about that? Of course, recency is like the one that was missing. If something happens happened very close in time, so very recently, it's much more likely that we'll remember that. Long story short, there are a lot of things that influence our memory and our perception, as I said before. So what we will be doing is like taking a look at biases, so cognitive biases, so things that make our brains be, let's say, not super reliable. They are based on those two things. Okay, let's start with like the definition of a cognitive bias. Everybody knows what a cognitive bias is. So a cognitive bias is just a mental error that is predictable and is caused by the simplification or by simplified information processing strategies. So I'm not talking about ideological biases. I'm not talking about like prejudice in terms of like your opinion. I'm talking about what your brains, about the shortcuts that our brains make, because our brains are lazy in general, everyone's brains. So our brains are lazy and they try to take shortcuts to make things easier so they don't work as much. And that's what we understand as cognitive bias, okay? 4 types of cognitive biases. We have biases on the evaluation of evidence, on the perception of cause and effect, on the estimation of probabilities, and the evaluation of analysis. And now you may think, how does this guy come up with all these things? Was like one night like super inspired? No, I read a book. Actually, I read many books, but there's one book that I read that is actually written by, I'll give you the name in the end, that's written by a former CIA analyst. And all this book is about intelligence analysis, so what the CIA does. So like when they collect information from, it's from this guy was working in the 60s and 70s, so Cold War. The Russians are saying this, and the Chinese are saying that. And is it true? Is it not? Do we have evidence? So that's what they were doing, and they found how these biases really influenced the, let's say, accuracy of the reports that they made. Of course, a lot of this stuff for intelligence analysis is not super relevant for us, but there's a lot of things in it that are very relevant to us as web analysts or digital analysts. Okay, stop blah blah. So, evaluation of evidence. What affects our ability to evaluate evidence? There's one that I really like, and probably you have experienced it as well at work, which is anecdotes versus statistical data, right? So we understand the statistical data as the law of large numbers. So if there's a strong statistics with a lot of users, with a lot of cases, and it's telling us, hey, this is what happens. This is the average. This is what we expect. But then people say, yeah, but I heard once that this person, to give you an example, there's European statistics saying that, Volvo are the best cars in terms of security, in terms of safety for drivers. So you crash with a Volvo and nothing will happen to you. And there are statistics about that. I'm not sure if it's true, I'm making it up, but let's consider it is. And then you have the person who comes yeah, but I know a man who had a Volvo, crashed and died. And then they try to put both things at the same level. That's what we call the man who syndrome. Because everybody knows a man or a woman who experienced something that is different to what statistics are saying. I think that for us as analysts that are used to working with data, that doesn't happen so often. But with our counterparts that who are supposed to receive our data, that happens very often. The second one is the oversensitivity on the consistency of evidence. This is basically the risk of looking for something that is very consistent. So let's say we have a segment in our data where we see a specific behavior happening. We see something that is always, yeah, okay, this is very solid. I see this correlation always happening. And there's this tendency to forget that it's just a segment. So it's okay, this is very consistent here. It must be for everybody. This is our population. These are all our customers. Yeah, but you're looking at 10% of your customers. Doesn't matter. It's just so solid, so true that this must be applied to everything. So this is what I mean with oversensitivity, with this consistency. When you find something consistent, it's the truth forever, for everybody. And the third one is that impressions remain after evidence has been discredited. This is kind of similar to the example that I gave you with this picture with the lady and so on. So you get or you do some very, let's say, preliminary analysis, and you get a certain idea, okay, this is how we should go. You give it to somebody and there's okay, this is the truth. And then you come with another more complete, better analysis that's that thing that I told you is not necessarily true. There's a nuance to it, let's consider this and that. Doesn't matter. People take the first thing you said and then they'll bring it. Especially if it supports their agenda, if it supports their opinion, they will just take it. That's why I'm super, super careful before I share data with anyone. Probably you do too. Because once you say, I don't know, for instance, this thing, yeah, we had an uplift on that test of 7% with a confidence interval of 4.5%, plus minus. This thing on the confidence interval, especially if you tell it later, they will forget. It's 7%, 7, yeah, but it's plus minus 4.5, so it could be just 2.5, 7%. So we have to be careful as well with that. That impression that we form, even if we get better data afterwards, just sticks with us. Good. Perception of cause and effect. There's this tendency in our human brains to favor causal, let's say, explanations to things. We rarely accept randomness. So things that happen randomly, think of history, of the history of humankind. When something was just random and nobody could really understand what was causing it, usually was the act of God or fate. Okay, if I don't see the cause for it, then must be like, I don't know, like something supernatural that is making this happen. No, there are things that happen randomly, and we need to accept that. The second one is the similarity of cause and effect. This is understood in the sense that if we have a major effect, so something massive is happening, like our conversion rate dropped by 80%, there must be a massively huge problem causing that. So big problems cause big effects, and small problems cause small effects. Well, that's not true. Like something very, very, very small can create like a massive fuck up. And something very, very big that is massive can have very little effect on our shops or on our websites or whatever it is. Internal versus external causes of behavior. I'll be a bit faster, because probably you're getting bored by now. We tend to think that, let's say, internal causes of behavior are more important than external causes of behavior. I'll give you an example for that. Suddenly you launch, let's say, a campaign, advertising campaign, and the campaign fails miserably. It's like there's like very few clicks, and the people who come to the shop don't really buy anything. They just like abandon the cart, so they don't even get into the cart. You think like, ooh, this campaign just didn't work because our customers don't like it. This is not what our customers like. Well, that could be true. But and this is something I've experienced myself as well. We tend to think that that's the case much more often than there are like other external factors that could be influencing that. It's not necessarily that the campaign is bad. It's not necessarily that our customers do not like that campaign. It can be that is, I don't know, the weather in my let's say, company, the weather is not the right weather to buy more clothes because it's still cold. Nobody's gonna buy summer clothes or the other way around. Or there's, I don't know, one of our competitors is having a massive sale and everything's so much cheaper by the competitor. I mean, all those factors also need to be considered. Okay? And then my favorite, correlation is not causation. Probably you also had that as well. You've seen, okay, if these two variables move similarly, means that they are related. Nope. And for that, I have one of my favorite examples, probably you heard of it, which is this lovely website, Spurious Correlations. They have a lot of examples, but this is my favorite because I'm a fan of Nicolas Cage. And this is the correlation between people drowned, so dead, drowned by falling into a pool, with the number of films where Nicolas Cage appeared. And there's a 66% correlation between the two. Is it related? Maybe. The films are so bad that you just like throw yourself on the swimming pool. I don't know. But probably not. Okay, so this is an essential thing. You probably heard about it already, but I had to say it. Doesn't mean that something that happens at the same time or like with the same effects doesn't mean that it's related. Good. Let's go on. Estimation of probabilities. This is a bit more, let's say, abstract. The availability rule of thumb. How we estimate probabilities, how we estimate the frequency of something or the probability that something happens. The availability one is quite interesting, is in terms of how well we can remember something. Example. How often does it rain on Sundays? And you can probably have an idea because usually Sunday is day off, and if it rains, it pisses you off. So it's like, okay, like 1 out of 4, something like that. If I ask you, how often does it rain on Tuesdays? Harder, right? So this is what it means, availability. What is available in our minds. Gotta go faster because otherwise we won't be able to get to the methodology part. The anchoring strategy. Anchoring strategy means that when you have something like a preliminary number, so like some estimation, you will use that estimated number to actually get to the actual number, to the actual truth. And the problem with that is that that adjustment that you do from the first estimation that can come from like, I don't know, something like, okay, like this, or like a, let's say, incomplete analysis, that adjustment that you do to get to the actual truth, it's not enough, and you will stay in the previous one. So, okay, I honestly, we can talk about it later. I don't really have the time to go through this because I've been told I have 10 minutes left. So let's go ahead. And then interpreting expressions of uncertainty, this is very important as well. When you write words like may, might, could, should, well, should not really, but could, like, it's likely that, those words are empty. They don't mean anything. So if we write those words, we read those words, we will make our own interpretation of the thing. So if you use those words, or the equivalent in Italian, it's so much better to always have a percentage together. So this may produce this thing, or this may have happened. Probability, 20% probability, 15% probability, whatever it is. Because what you think is a 15, for other person is an 80. So yeah, long story short that. And then last but not least, kind of bias. When we evaluate analysis, my favorite is the second one. So when we give our analysis, our report to someone, it's like, obvious, I knew it. Well, that's an effect as well of our brains. We underestimate what we learn from new information. It's like, of course, that was obvious. But also it's quite interesting, the first one, which is that we tend to overestimate how accurate our analysis was. So it's quite interesting to go back to the analysis that we did, especially if we're trying to predict what's going to happen, and review it and say, like, that estimation was okay, my hypothesis was really going in the right direction, now after some time, okay, let's check it. And if you actually are surprised by how wrong you were, probably you're doing something wrong. So just review your methodology. Okay, go. Methodology for better analysis. Sorry, I need to rush, but I've been taking it too slowly. So this is pretty much the methodology that we use on my team. We introduced this last year to try to avoid some of these problems. I'm not saying that we follow this methodology for absolutely every single analysis that we do. Sometimes, why is that? Because this takes time, this takes effort. And sometimes it's just small things like, okay, fine, we just compare the numbers, the bigger number wins, fine. But when you're about to make a big decision, especially if it's an important decision about should we shut down this feature? Should we fire that team? No, we don't do that. Should we, I don't know, invest more on this? Invest less on that. So when it's really a major decision for our company, we definitely follow this methodology. First, define the problem. So the most important thing, I always say that, when I hire analysts, I always say it, is not so important how you answer a question. The more important thing is to be sure that it's the right question. That's the first thing. And for that, you can brainstorm, you can gather information, opinions, information from a lot of different people. But this is the most important thing. Balance quality and speed. So, of course, quality takes time, but sometimes you need to have a fast answer. Balance that. Consider what makes most sense. And, of course, this is my favorite. Write everything down as a contract. Avoid scope creep. You know, the idea of scope creep? So somebody comes to your desk, is can you please give me numbers on that thing? And you give it to them. They're oh, great. And what about this thing? Okay, give it to them. Oh, and what about that thing? The what about syndrome. And then can be with what about for 3 days. They're okay, I give you all the information. What are you going to do with this? I don't know. And that's it. And they made your life miserable for half a week, and they're actually making no decision with it. That happens so often. So that's what we understand as scope creep. We also understand it as request diarrhea or the what about syndrome. How we deal with that. So we deal with that with a contract. You can take a picture if you want. This is 2 parts. This is a contract that we write every time we get an analysis request, especially the complex ones. I mean, for the simple ones where we tell them hey, this is Google Analytics, log in, pull it yourself. For the complex ones where you actually need an analyst, this is what we do. And then on the first page, there's always a description of the objective or the initiative. So what is this analysis related to? And then they have to tell us what is the success indicator of your initiative. So what is the KPIs? What is your objective? What are you trying to achieve? What is your KPI for this initiative? Okay, great. And then they have to think about it. They have to write it down. It's great. And after that, we go into the analysis part. And for that, we have first, okay, what is the purpose of this analysis? Why are you asking me this? And then we go into the objectives, several objectives of the analysis. So what is the objective? So what's the title of the question, of this objective of this question? What is the description? What is the rationale? So why are you asking me this? And most importantly, what kind of decision are you going to make based on that information that I'm going to give you? If they're unable to fill this in, I'm not working for them. This works. And to be honest, we've been doing this for a year and a half, and the quality of the requests that we receive has improved so much. I mean, sometimes people need help to fill this up. So you sit down with them for an hour and you fill it up together, and they learn with that. It's like, oh, wow, now I understand that. I probably won't ask it again because now I understand it makes no sense. So that really helps. It's also like an educational effort towards the teams we work with. Cool. If you have any questions, you can stop me. I mean, there's also some time in the end, but okay. Otherwise, I go with flow. Second, we generate hypotheses. So we identify and list all the plausible hypotheses that need to be considered. This must be done on a brainstorm mode. So no hypothesis is a stupid hypothesis. Just list absolutely everything. Okay? That's what it means with suspend judgment. It's stupid, doesn't matter, write it down. And very important, do not exclude hypotheses just because there is no evidence to support them. It's like, yeah, this sounds unlikely, I've never seen any data supporting this thing. Doesn't matter, write it down. We'll try to look for that data. Okay? Third, once those our hypotheses are listed, we'll collect evidence. Collect evidence means, okay, we pull reports, we do A/B tests, we do different things. We talk to our competitors, if they want to, or we gather some, let's say, competitor analysis, whatever it is. Evidence has many different forms, many different shapes. For all of them, not just the ones that seem most likely. And actually, if there's one hypothesis that looks very, very likely, it's like most likely is this one, try to find all the evidence that you can that contradicts it. This is how science works. We're not trying to find evidence that supports our hypothesis. We're trying to find evidence that contradicts our hypothesis. Fine. Once you have that, we will evaluate hypotheses. We will focus on development arguments against, as I mentioned, each of these hypotheses. And it's very helpful for this to use a matrix format that keeps track of the evidence and how it relates to hypothesis, something that looks like this. This is an oversimplification. I took it from the internet. I was not really allowed to show anything related to our work. Sorry for that. But basically, you have three hypotheses. So climate change nowadays is caused by man-made causes, natural causes, or a combination of both. So H1, H2, H3, da, 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 and then you list all your evidence. It's like, okay, this supports, contradicts, contradicts. This supports, not applicable, supports, contradicts, da, da, da. And in the end, you sum how many minuses you got. So this is not a good hypothesis. Not sure if you believe it or not. I'm not getting into that. Basically, it's just for the example. H2 got a lot of like minuses, so H2 is out, is debunked. The other two have -1, Okay, these two, any of the two could be the best hypothesis. What we will do now, we will collect more evidence until we can debunk one of them. In the end, the one that wins is, not this one, doesn't matter, I will follow that. The one that wins is the one that has less minuses, the ones that has less evidence contradicting the hypothesis. That's your most likely hypothesis, not the other way around. Okay? 2 minutes left. Okay, I gotta run. Important to write down in your report all the hypotheses that you consider, at least like the more reasonable ones, to cite the arguments that supported your judgment, but also the arguments that rejected the other hypothesis. Okay? And quite important, new data may alter your understanding of the situation. So what I said before, go back to those analyses that you did in the past. Is this still true? Now that I know more about the business, about the company, about what we do, does this still hold true? It's good to go back. And yeah, see if you have anything that contradicts, and especially if new data is consistent with an alternative hypothesis. It's always good to go back and review. I had to run. Conclusions. Basically, human thinking is flawed, so our brains are lazy, our brains play tricks on us, we have to know about that. There are cognitive bias related to this, limitations, and the best way to actually overcome that is to adopt a solid methodology. First, of course, is to be aware of it. And second is to have a solid methodology. Now you may ask, how does your methodology actually solve all the biases that you mentioned? It does not. I think it addresses some of them. Some others, it doesn't. But at least you're aware of it. Okay? Good. References. Those are the books that I used. I mean, actually, I studied library science, so conservazione beni culturali per le biblioteche, queste cose. That's why very old school for this. So this one is the one from the CIA that I told you about, that Richard Hoyer, and then Lean Analytics, I think it's a famous one. I do not necessarily agree with everything that's in that book, but I think it's a good book overall. Thanks very much. That's my Instagram, if you want to see my stupid pictures. Also Twitter, but I don't use Twitter that much. But if you want to reach out, you can do that. Questions now, right? We have some time. Okay.
Hi, Jorge. I work for a company that has difficulty with accepting data. We've recently decided to go digital, so I guess it's inevitable. Do you have any other tips for, convincing, other than the contract that I think is very interesting?
The contract will help you when you want to work with people who have questions and are like kind of stupid questions, but actually to convince people that they should use data. I think it's more related to this man who thing that I was talking about, right? Like, hey, data is saying this, but still my opinion is better. That's a hard one. I mean, the best is to try to find examples where the opinion really messed it up. So that you had like some data saying like, hey, let's do this. And actually the opinion took to take a different decision and the result was terrible. Can be examples in your own company or can be examples in other companies. Something that shows like, hey, we actually have the ability to avoid problems, to avoid errors, to avoid mistakes. Look at what happened in these cases when they didn't do that. I will start with that. Second, I will try to find a sponsor. So someone like in the, let's say in the management, in the top, who believes in data or who believes in the power of data. That's super important. And then make that person your, your sponsor in the end. Like, hey, nobody accepts this, but if someone can really help you in that sense, that has like, let's say, certain pay grade and certain reputation within the company, that will help you a lot. I've been in the same situation, so I know how hard it is. More questions? Don't be shy. Okay, back there. This is my favorite part, running around.
Good point about to make the contract. I mean, in my company that I'm working for Sky, so it's impossible to do something like that because there are people so frustrated about asking data about whatever they done or not, so they want to have KPIs, results, and so on. But happens a lot that sometimes when I provide some, after big analysis, also 1 month of analysis, I provide some feedbacks about some KPIs, some insights about improvement, and after like 7 months, that results are like unacceptable anymore. So sometimes I deal with the problem like the results are not anymore valuable over time. And it makes like wrong way to approach some kind of analysis. And also the digital analyst makes like sometimes not a strong sense because it's like, okay, my job 6 months ago, it doesn't have any sense and arrive at the CE level. So they take decisions, so on and so on. Have you ever happened something like that in New Zealand, or how do you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, we have very often like cases like those. Like, you do an analysis, you submit like this thing, like, okay, my job is to do this report and just give it to you, and what happens afterwards, I don't really care. I don't really care about like telling a story of it. I don't really care about convincing people. I think that's wrong. I think that as analysts, we have to own that and actually try to tell a story in the organization, because otherwise our work is just not important. So in that case, also when you do something that back in the days made sort of sense and now you look at it, it's like, meh, it doesn't hold true anymore. I think it's also very good to look into why that's the case. It was an error of yours. It is as the context has changed, the company has changed, the environment has changed. So like truths from last year may not be truths today. So that's something that is important to, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question more or less. Oh, yeah, correct.
Sometimes there are people that are already, I mean, that's I'm talking about big companies. So sometimes when people take decision based on data, some reports that some other team done, these people that they done the analysis, that see the data, see everything, are not in some kind of table. So they took sometimes wrong decision because who is reading your analysis, even if you write good insights and so on, it's taking some, let me say, taking some vanity metrics just only to create some speech and so on, just only because they like and they love CR. So conversion rate is the most important. Then the flow, whatever, it sucks. So I mean, sometimes it's tough when you have to work in some situation where even some decision around you arrives to you when it's already done. And for you it's too late even. So.
Yes, I experienced that at Zalando. I experienced that in every single company where I worked. That's not only you. I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem everywhere. Vanity metrics, indeed. I had this case where, like, but we have 2 billion users. Like, so what? Like, our conversion rate is dropping. Like, okay, you have a lot of new users, but are crappy users. We're paying for each of those users, but they're not buying anything. But doesn't matter. So that's the problem. I would say in that case, you need like also something similar to what I was saying before. Some sort of sponsor, somebody who's out there, like in the room where decisions are taken, that understands data. I know, it's like kind of like the... Yeah, politics. No, it's true. So he's saying that when you confront them with data, they kind of lose their power. Like, kind of, hey, it's not my decision. It's like data telling me what to do. Fair, that happens. I think it's a very interesting discussion. I would like to give the chance for more questions. If you want, we can follow up afterwards. Huh? Okay, more questions?
We have no more time.
No more time, too bad. Okay, then catch me when you can later. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks
you.
very much for being so kind.